Well, it says that we are live. I've never seen that before on the screen. It's like, you are live. It was like right in my face. Happy Saturday, everyone, including Matthew Fairburn, the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show pregame edition today on a really nice Saturday. We've had some really good weather here, but I'm going to be inside today watching the Buffalo Sabres. I think you, Matthew Fairburn, down at the arena are also going to be stuck inside for the next few hours watching the Buffalo Sabres take on the St. Louis Blues. We got a few people coming in. We'll give them a few more seconds, but time is short because we got to make sure that you, Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, are in position for warm-ups, catch any line combinations that might be going on, and just kind of get ready for the big game today. Sabres Blues, 1 o'clock puck drop. So, are you good to go, Matthew? Are you all settled into your little? You're not in your usual office. It's kind of weird.
No, I'm in a little nook here in the press box. If people hear some slight background noise, it's just the in-house acoustics getting warm for the game day presentation and whatnot. But it was a foggy drive in this morning. It's beautiful out. The temperature is great. I just have a light jacket on, but super foggy. Couldn't even hardly see the arena until you were right on top of it. So interesting, made for an interesting drive in, but now we've got a nationally televised game, Kris, for these Sabres. Can they still put on a show? Are they still that type of team that can be worthy of the national TV spotlight? We'll find out here in about an hour.
They're wearing the blue and gold today, right? Because they just did the red and black last game. So the chances of the show time coming from at least one of the blue and gold teams today is a little less, I think. But we'll see how it goes. Because they didn't have a bad game on Tuesday against Dallas. They just couldn't put the puck in the net. They kind of ran into a pretty hot goalie there. Today's goalie matchup, by the way, and we'll get to the game a little bit later because I think we have a lot of things that we want to talk about in a kind of a compressed window here. Looks like UPL is going to get the start today against former Portland Winterhawk Joe Hoffer. So getting a little backup action today. Maybe that helps the Sabres put on a show. We'll see. But either way, Matthew, a lot going on on the Twitterverse anyways, a lot of chatter. That, of course, is not a new topic for fans of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. I saw some things heating up last night. Went out to happy hour, got home, had dinner, fired up the old Twitter, saw people were talking about last night. I'm seeing this Casey Mittelstadt name popping up a little more frequently than it has in recent weeks anyways. I don't know if that's the proper place to start, but I think it's kind of a hot topic that we should probably at least touch upon. So let's go. I believe it was our good friend, Andrew Peters, from After the Whistle podcast with Craig Viveri. Great podcast, by the way. I don't mind pumping up the tires of other podcasts. They're awesome.
Excellent show.
And yeah, Andrew this week had put on his reporter's hat because he's still plugged in. And he had received some information that apparently Kevin Adams is shopping. And that's the key word, shopping Casey Mittelstadt. We've talked about it. I went back last night when I was sitting in the chair and I was like, when did Matthew and I first kind of go on that topic? It was November 1, 10 games into the season. We talked about it for 15 minutes. For folks that are now kind of not early adopters of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show, I would encourage you to go back to that November 1st episode of Baker Fairburn Hockey Show and check out the discussion. Talked about it for about 15 minutes amongst other things. It's now right in the kind of center of the Sabreverse now in terms of the news cycle. Thoughts on what you're hearing? Is it corroborated? Has your position kind of matured from where we were back in November? What's your take on what Andrew reported?
It has not, my take hasn't dramatically changed on this topic. I think, it's a matter of shopping feels maybe like it's a little strong.
Yeah.
It could be just a matter of semantics, right? Kevin Adams is calling every team in the league this time of year. He's checking in and frankly is not doing his due diligence as general manager if he's not figuring out what the value is for Casey Mittelstadt, especially when you're talking about a guy who needs a contract, right? You're weighing what could a potential return look like versus what does a potential, new deal look like. So I think that's that's the tricky part of this time of year, I think, is that between, not just this most recent report, but, Elliot Friedman has tossed Casey Mittelstadt's name out there just in terms of kind of connecting the dots, right? Like we did in November, is if they're not winning and he is not signed, that's the next logical conversation. And it's a matter of price, it's a matter of term, and it's a matter of return. Those are the three key pieces to this that you kind of have to decide on. And as we talked about a little bit off the air, what's coming, right? Who in the pipeline might be ready and how soon. So it's not a matter of Casey Mittelstadt being, a bad player or a bad fit or any of that. I think it's the opposite. He's your most valuable potential trade asset at the moment because and still could be after a contract, but that's why his name is going to pop up. And he's probably a name that teams are calling about, right? And saying, hey, here's this RFA that's not signed. Let's remember at this time last year, Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins were already signed to their extensions. Cousins had his over the All-Star break. So the fact that there hasn't been a lot of progress there, it's going to lead to this type of speculation. And it's a tricky spot when you already have your two top centers locked up, in theory, in Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins. Now you're talking about, depending on the number, what does that number 3 center look like? So he's probably a top 6 price tag, a top 6 type of player, but doesn't always slot there in the Sabres lineup. So it makes it a little bit tricky.
He'd be a crazy good third line centerman on one of these playoff teams. Like, you think about the depth that would give another team down the middle. That's going to be attractive if he truly is having conversations, Kevyn Adams, with some of these teams. It depends on, if he's having a conversation with a team that's in the playoff race, that kind of lessens the maybe readiness of what you're going to get in return. If that's the part of it that kind of scares me about this heating up now closer to the deadline. That's something that you and I talked about also earlier in the season. Was the earlier that you move on maybe that decision on Mittelstadt, based on discussions that you're having with his representation and everything else, you have a broader pool of, I think, teams to talk to and maybe getting more value, in terms of usable players now. Because we know that the nature of the trades that you make closer to the deadline, teams that are buyers are usually flipping prospects and picks but also a lot of times it's for expiring contracts that they're getting in return just to make a 1-year run. It's going to be really interesting to see who he's talking to, if he truly is, right? I believe what Andrew's saying, because I know what I mean? I know who the connections that he has. It's real and it makes sense.
I think, to your point, what you just outlined would make me somewhat surprised if something got done before the deadline, because it almost doesn't feel like it would. Hey, maybe the right deal pops up. You have to be ready at any time, and that's why you take the calls. That's why you do your due diligence. But at the same time, if you're trying to widen your potential pool of suitors and the potential return pieces that you could get in terms of ready-made, because I think the other part of this, Kris, is that, these teams that are in a playoff position, you're not just talking about picks, which people are probably sick of getting in return for these players. You're talking about a late pick, right? And I don't know, I haven't familiarized myself with this draft class quite yet, but I think there is some early chatter that the later first round picks are kind of teams are more eager to move the pick because maybe, the depth of the first round isn't quite, what it might be in the other years. But that aside, it's still a late first round pick, which, as we know, is not a sure bet. So that's where I would be somewhat surprised, especially given the way Kevyn Adams has handled this season, kind of letting this core group of players figure this out, work through it. Mittelstadt being a key component on and off the ice to that. But when the right deal pops up, the right deal pops up. And maybe you get a team, sweetening the deal, being a little bit more desperate at the deadline. We've already seen the center market is pretty solid. That Lindholm return was a nice, haul for Calgary. So that worked out, on either end. It's
how many of those are there to make right now, though?
That's the question, right? How many of those types of hockey trades, and that was still a Calgary team that is okay getting some picks back and getting some prospects back, right? Whereas the Sabres, that's already their strength. So it makes more sense as an off-season deal, especially because you're just buying yourself more time to maybe get a deal done, or maybe move different pieces and maybe keep Casey Mittelstadt, and it's not to advocate for being indecisive or hesitant, because I think a lot of people would criticize Kevin Adams for that already, but you have to be smart with an asset like this, a homegrown player, 25 years old, entering his prime, who is somebody who likes playing here, which is not insignificant, as we've talked about too. It's hard to attract people from outside to feel the same way that a Casey Mittelstadt's going to feel about the Sabres organization.
We were saying for a long time, the Sabres, just the market, the team, the reputation. It's an organization that has to promote from within. That's how they're going to get back to maybe a top 10 team in the league at some point. Here's a guy, they drafted him, worked his way up. It's that promotion from within. But the other part to that Andrew Peters little blurb on Mittelstadt was that it was Kevin Adams doesn't want to pay him. Now, I don't know if that was commentary or if that's what he's being fed from his source, but that's a big part of this, because there's another option that you can go to, right? It's you can sign him, extend him on a tradable contract. But, I'm seeing in the chat, I think some of the models, like we discussed last week, someone said 5.8 AAV, and I thought that was too low. I said it begins with a 6. And now I think it was Cummings or someone in the chat. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I saw the number 6.8 for maybe Dom, one of your peers from The Athletic. I'm not finding it now. Here we go. Brian Cummings says Dom L, was it Lucision? Has a value of 6.8 million on Mittelstadt. Well, that might explain, if that's more what the market's going to be for Casey Mittelstadt, then you can maybe understand why Kevin Adams is not touching that, right?
Yeah, that's the big piece here. And it's what we've talked about from the beginning, is how many of these guys can you afford to be paying that number? It blocks what you can do elsewhere. And I think to your point, it has to be a tradable contract, right? If, you want the flexibility in the future for Noah Ostlund to step into a spot, Matt Savoy if he continues to play center, Yuri Kulik if he continues to play center. So you want the flexibility to move some of these pieces. So do you maybe get a shorter deal, lower money, to give him the option to get to a UFA sooner? There's options there, but really the price tag is going to be a pivotal piece of this, and whether or not they can make any sort of progress towards, a deal, or, because there's teams in different cap situations that would love to have this player with different depth charts, that need centers. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's everything we talked about in November, which hadn't crossed my mind because I hadn't really entertained the idea of the Sabres being at this point, 10 points out, really looking like a seller. So if you're selling, this is the most attractive trade asset on your roster right now, because the UFAs are only getting you small draft pick return at best.
Dude, he's probably your team MVP. I think there's 3 guys that are the MVP of the team this year. Yeah, he should have been the All-Star. It's Mittelstadt. UPL you can talk about just because, but I think it's more about he's exceeding expectations. Is he your most valuable in the big picture? I don't know, because, they would have to be a playoff team for him to be the most valuable. And then, Peterka, I think, is in the picture, honestly, especially if he keeps kind of going, right? He's still writing his story for this season, and he can continue to take off. We never know. But my 2 big thoughts on this whole Mittelstadt situation are, one, if you're going to, if you think that you're going to get a guy to play with Owen Power in return, I don't think you get that at the trade deadline. So the conversations that Kevin Adams is having right now are probably setting the foundation for whatever work they get done in June before UFA, right around the draft, whatever. The other part is, again, on this theme, if they're an organization that has to promote from within to kind of really get a good young core, and that's what they've been doing, then for me, it's really about Savoy and Ostlund, because you have these guys that are firecrackers. They can play. They're looking good, but they're not ready yet. So if you move Mittelstadt this offseason, if you go to 2024-25 without Casey Mittelstadt, to me, you probably have like a 2-year gap, at least, that you're going to have to fill at that position. And you're still going to need a defenseman, right? So it's like, I don't know. Those are my
unless
thoughts.
you get one in return. Unless you get one in return, right? Like,
right.
You're not moving him without getting at least that defenseman in return, I don't think. And maybe not even without a potential bottom 6 center also. The other piece of this, which would be interesting, but they've shown no signs of this, is that it's also potentially the spot where Peyton Krebs could step into. Like, do you feel that he could be your 3C in the lineup and surround him with some more offensive players? They haven't shown that they want to do that yet, right? They haven't.
Well, they better start the audition then.
They haven't really given him that audition. I do want to pull up this comment from Ryan, this question that I think is relevant to the whole discussion, because he asks, everyone wants to rush to ship out prospects. Has Kevin Adams earned the right to let his picks play out and see what ones make it and what ones don't? And it's an interesting piece to sort of the backdrop of the Kevin Adams trade deadline conversation, because I think for sure, if you're moving out Casey Mittelstadt, you want some ready-made players that are on term or willing to be on term that can help you, top 4 defensemen and a bottom 6 player and maybe a prospect. You want a legit return. But I like Ryan's question because we talk about the strategy that they've implemented, this long, patient approach, which is prudent in hockey, and for a team like the Sabres, who needs to get players to buy into being Buffalo Sabres and promote from within and get them excited about being here. Has Kevin Adams earned the time to let some of these guys continue to develop? Now you're talking about a long timeline, right? Even with Savoy, Ostlund, Kulik, maybe not being impact players for another couple of years, but the drafting has gone pretty well. For the valid criticisms of Kevin Adams as a general manager, the drafting has been pretty decent so far from what we've seen. Of course, having a number 1 overall pick makes it a little bit easier. Having 3 first-round picks makes it a little bit easier. But
yeah, it's like when publications rank the prospect pools, and this, like, the Sabres are always here. It's like, yeah, no shit.
Right. All they've been doing is picking in the top 50, right? But
yeah.
JJ Peterka, 2nd-round pick. That's pretty good. Jack Quinn was not a consensus pick, was actually quite unpopular, if memory serves. And injuries have been a problem, but he looks good. Kulik, late 1st round to get him. Benson at 13. I think he's putting together a decent little track record here in terms of drafting. I know you like some of the defensemen that they've gotten last year. And Wahlberg, you like Poltapot, so they've started to accumulate some decent players. You can't wait forever, right? That would be great for every general manager to say, just give me 8 years, and once all these picks play out. But I think there is an element of, of what Ryan's saying here. Maybe he's earned just a little bit longer to see how these guys continue to develop. But you also need to know when to sell. You need to know when the time is right to move one of those guys or two to get you somebody that's ready to play.
It's their job to manage the assets, right? Like, you have your player development staff working with these guys all the time, whether they're in Rochester or they're still with their European home clubs or junior clubs, and they have to know what they have. Opinions change on guys. Just because your amateur scouts like guys when you draft them, but then it's a whole other set of resources that start working with them once they're drafted. And opinions change on players based on who's working with them. They have to manage those assets. I think in the big picture, you can't implement a strategy saying we're going to build this from the draft, from the ground up, and then kind of pull the plug and just say you haven't earned the right to, because then you're deviating and then you get to zero real quick. Like you almost have to restart in many ways. But no, but they have to know what they have. They're going to manage their assets. I think they can't sit on all these prospects forever. They have to have a good understanding of who's who and what their timeline is. They got to get Oslin over here next year. They got to get Savoy in. They got to get these guys in. I think those are two that are going to be, they're going to pop. You know, you got to know what roles these guys are going to fill too. If you have to change your attitude of your team, you got to look at how you play today. You have a team that can't get to the net regularly. You have a team that they pass up shooting. It's maddening. So if you have some prospects that are going to be more bulls and china shop, hard-nosed, heavy, and they can skate, then you start slotting them in. You put them in the good pile. You got to, you start separating them. There's guys like Isak Rosén, good prospects that might not really fit or have a harder time getting in the lineup next season or in 2 years because of who you've already extended, and you're not going to move in trades. And you got to kind of, they have to have a couple piles here. I think Kevin Adams he still has the right. I think he still has the right to kind of let a lot of these play out based on what I just said. Have some decisions though on guys that you don't think fit the program, and those are the guys. And it's a small group, but that's how you start chipping away at this little stack of chips that you have.
Yeah, Rosén was the one that always pops into my head, trying to figure out where he fits and how quickly, and trying to, like you said, maximize the value. Right? It's like the stock market. It's like trying to pick at the right time when to get rid of a guy, when to hold, the whole thing. It actually, Scott Wheeler had an interesting point on Twitter about this week. One of our prospect writers, when he was pushing back a little bit on the idea that like people doing a 2022 redraft, it's way too soon. People were up in arms or re-ranking these prospects in the 22 draft. Or even the 23 draft, 8 months later. And his point was, if teams aren't doing that, they're not doing their job, right? You don't want to change your opinion too quickly, but to your point, your amateur guy picks somebody, your development guys are working closely now with somebody after 8 months, and they say, I'm not sure what the trajectory looks like. Now, all of a sudden, maybe we think he's here, but you have a better idea of him than the other 31 teams around the league, because you're working hands-on with them. That's key. That is crucial to accelerating your timeline, building your team. Is the evaluation doesn't stop. It stops for Jerry Fortin and the amateur staff. It doesn't stop for the organization. And so you've now got a big body of work on a lot of these prospects. And you have to figure out which ones fit, which ones don't, which ones you feel best about, or which ones that maybe you feel good about, but other teams feel really good about them too, and you can get a nice return. It feels like we're at a little bit of a moment of reckoning with that, right? Like, you can feel good about every prospect, but which ones does, maybe the Wild feels better about Isak Rosén than you do, or they value him a little bit higher. That's when you move, especially if you don't see a spot in the lineup. And it feels like we're going to reach a boiling point at some point, both with where the Sabres are, right? The pressure, if they think they have pressure this year, just wait until next year.
Yep.
Especially if the same staff is in place, same front office, potentially the same coach. I haven't ruled out, that as well.
As of now, we have no reason to believe that anything's going to change right now.
Because I think you can make the same point about Kevin Adams, or Don Granato that you made about Kevin Adams, right? That if it is a patient, develop from within approach, and he's a guy that's got a strong track record of developing players, why do you pull the plug? Other than all the reasons we've mentioned about how the team, there's legitimate reasons to do it. But if you're following that train of logic, and that's where the timing of the extensions, right, before last season sort of signaled that, yes, this is a multi-year vision. And so maybe, so my point being, as the pressure ramps up on this team entering next season, that's when you need some of those more short-term fixes, veteran players that maybe can play in the top four on defense or middle six, and bring some of that compete, some of that jam, some of that net front presence. And you've also reached a point with your prospects, I think, where you're bursting at the seams, right? You have so many of these guys. You're making Chris Baker way too busy. He's watching way too many games. There's so many players in the system. But also, you've reached a point with those players where you have a big body of work post-draft. You should be able to decide now who fits, who doesn't, who do you like, who do you not, who do you like more than others, and try to make moves that are going to help your team next year. Because we can talk about the pressure they've faced this year and their inability to live up to it. It's only going to keep getting stronger, I think, that pressure as time goes on, unless apathy completely sets in from the
no, not an option. But you said the word pressure, and we only have about 10 minutes left ish. We have plenty of time to talk about the Mittelstadt thing as we go, because we're going to keep recording episodes. This isn't the last ever Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. Let's talk a little bit about the pressure, both in this season, maybe when you compare and contrast to last season. You had a couple themes. I don't know if that's the right way to frame it, coming into this season. And we should probably talk about that right now, because they're 10 points out of the final wild card spot still. They're 50 games into the season. I think today's game 51. Don't hold me to it.
It is.
We saw this team last year come out of the All-Star break. They were in the thick of it going into the break. They were hot, right? Fun. Everyone wanted to watch the Buffalo Sabres last year. They were scoring a ton. Power play was ripping. And then they kind of fell flat. And what did they say? Or at least, it wasn't a team that really handled the pressure. Young group, right? They kind of fell back out of the race. The pressure came off, and then they became fun again. What's your just take on that as it relates to this season? Because they're 10 points back right now. They should be playing free and fun, right?
Well, I remember in the preseason, I think it was in the preseason, because I recall sitting not far from where I'm sitting now after what I think was the final preseason game, and we were reporting one of these, and you brought up
a Pittsburgh game. Yeah. Sorry.
And
go ahead.
You've got a good memory. And you brought up that point of how will they handle that going into this season. And I think it became a pretty smart point by you as time went on that they didn't handle it very well out of the gate. First off, they didn't handle it organizationally well. I felt like, we've heard a lot of mixed messaging about, tighten up on defense, and maybe that's going to take away some of the offense, sort of white knuckling it from the start, right? Need to play better defense, and sort of getting away from the identity that made them a team that almost made the playoffs last year. So organizationally, top down, it felt like they felt some of that pressure. And Don Granato's brought it up a lot this week in reference to the injuries, saying that they're in this better place psychologically to handle it, and that they're in a better place in general psychologically over the last 3 or 4 weeks. They're playing better hockey. I think everybody sees that. But the question I asked him the other day was, because he brought that up, he brings it up in reference to a lot of things, whether it's the power play or the penalty killer, guys improving. And he talks about guys being in different, life situations, right? New contracts for Dylan Cousins, Tage Thompson, Owen Power, Rasmus Dahlin, feeling this individual pressure. And he said he feels like some guys have really let go of that and have really started to find themselves again. To which I said, how do you know that they've learned how to deal with that versus it's just gone because you're 10 points out of the race, right? It might just be gone. Like, when it comes back, what's going to happen? Because we saw at the end of last season, when it came back, it became a little bit of the same situation. But also, when it came back this fall, it was the same situation as, last year when they fell out of it. So that's an interesting, Don Granato's point was that each time you go through it, you get better at it. And these guys are still incredibly young, the youngest team in hockey. So it's a question of, will it finally sink in with this group of players?
Show me, don't blow me.
Right. Does the patience that we talked about with Kevin Adams and Don Granato, like, have they earned the right to let these guys develop, or has this young core earned that right to show that they can work through it? Is it a natural thing, or does the roster need to be supported more in different ways with different types of leadership? Does a different voice at head coach change how a team handles pressure? Maybe, or is it just a matter of time and age? I think it's an interesting thread to follow at some point, because the pressure is not back, right? They're still 10 points out. You get to play like it doesn't matter at this point.
Play free, get some points. You never know. But no, going back to kind of how we set the table for this whole pressure management discussion, the worst thing that happened to this team was having all those home games at the beginning of the year. I would make an argument that the season gets off on a much different note if they were on the road, but that's, hey, whatever. Can't change that. That's how the schedule is built, but I'm still stuck on that. I won't let it go. Okay. You got a boogie in a few minutes. Let's
warm-ups just started a few minutes early. So if the music is turned up here, people
you got a couple to go through a couple chats, or no? Do you have a couple
let's go through, and if I got a bail, then you can clean out the chat in my absence. Shouldn't be any surprises in the lineup, by the way. Don Granato said same lineup, same lines as Tuesday night, so UPL and goal. And
okay,
shouldn't be any surprises. But if the volume is too loud, let me know. I'll mute while I'm not talking.
You're all good. Wyoming Trout says, we need more big bodies. I would love to get Marcus Foligno back in case he is from Minnesota. I've thought about that myself personally, and I think I even mentioned it to you. I don't know if it was on or off line, just about how, man, Foligno's that type of player, that they could use some of that, just inject that into the lineup, that attitude, that big body, that net front, all that stuff. Let's see. A lot of the chat talking to each other today. I love to see it. Makes it hard, though, to pull out the ones.
This is a good point.
Go ahead.
Half the team can't enjoy a nice cold beverage after a long game to reset. Maybe that's part of the problem with the pressure. Once they get more guys that are 21, everything will start to sort itself out.
Yep, I agree. That helps. Michael Pakla Spike says, "Yep, Kris, this is on Mittelstadt off-season deal, if at all." Yeah, I mean you certainly can cast a broader net, have more conversations, shop offers against one another. That's kind of it just makes sense when you're running the business side of it for sure. Charlie, who is a big commenter, brings a lot of vitriol in the comments. I'm happy to see Charlie here on the live version. I don't know if Charlie's regularly in, but he's certainly active in the chat today. Paterka leads the team in goals, but sits on the bench while I watch Poso and coach his son play in the power play in the top line. Now, for those that haven't been following in the comments, who Charlie is referring to is Jordan Greenway. Just want to throw that up there. Now, Okposo up top has been kind of out of necessity. I think that we talked about it, right or wrong. He's been playing better than I thought he would have this year. He still doesn't add speed to the lineup, and I get Charlie's point, but I wanted to reward Charlie by throwing one of his comments up on the screen today, because he's all over the comments in the videos once they are not live anymore. Let's see. Rob Wise, this is going back to the Mittelstadt discussion. I'm wondering if the Peters comment regarding payment was more about the years and the amount. That's possible. Like if I'm Casey Mittelstadt, I don't know if I'm taking a short-term deal regardless of dollars. I don't know.
Well, you've watched everybody around you get paid.
That's
right?
part of it. Yeah.
And you go out and earn it in every sense of the word. And you're essentially the only player that has been consistent wire to wire for this team since last February. So he's certainly gone out and earned it and earned the right to push that value as much as he can. And that's where this whole conversation starts, right? That's why it gets interesting, because, if it were a team-friendly deal, you might be having a different conversation.
I agree. CHB123 says, Mitz is everything the team would want or need. Experienced player who has become what you developed and wanted him to become. Correct. You trade him, and if your return is some prospect and picks, water gun to the head. So, yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing with Mittelstadt too, is he's exactly as you described, but you have all these other guys that you signed, They've established themselves just like Casey has to a certain extent. You can argue maybe Cousins hasn't fully established himself yet. That was more speculative. But you're not winning with these guys, and you might have to just give yourself a new look. And Matthew, you said something I thought that was very important when we were talking on your drive down to the arena today. It's not like Mittelstadt is this unicorn, right?
Right.
Like you can get similar production out of maybe a different player that maybe has just a different player profile too, that does different things.
He's a very good player. He's very good in the room, and he is, to this commenter's point, he has developed the way you wanted him to develop. All those things can be true, but especially with his role on the team, where he would be your third highest paid center. So in theory, your third center. He is worthy of being a top 6 center. We say he should have been their all-star. He's probably their team MVP to this point. But the team is 10 points out of the playoffs, right? And so I think there's a point to be made that top-end centers are scarce in the NHL. Those are great assets. But Mittelstadt, if everything goes to plan with Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins, Mittelstadt's really your 3. You can find a third center, right? UFA, that's 28, 29. The Krebs question is a legitimate one, but to me, if you're banking on that going into next year, you're risking more of the same. More of the same
exactly.
This year. So I think you can find. It's not a matter too of get rid of Mittelstadt for prospects or picks for stuff. It's get rid of Mittelstadt if you can get stuff to help your team next year, period. If that's not happening, I enter into a different part of this conversation where I'm with some of these commenters that say, if it's prospects and picks, then what are we doing, right? What exactly is the plan there? You only do it if it's helping your team next year in other areas. To your point, change the makeup of the group, change the look, and get some depth in other areas where then you go and find the way the Red Wings have, right? You find these bottom 6 players in unrestricted free agency or smaller trades to bring in an experienced, kind of guy there. I think in that way, it can work.
I'm with you, man. Hey, it's 12:31. We've already established that warm-ups are going. I got to get you to your chair next to, I'm assuming Joe Yurden is your line mate.
And Jonah Bronstein.
And Jonah LeBronstein. Tell him I said hello, man. I got to get up to Elmo's and play grab ass with Jonah. It's been a little bit. I'll let you get situated. I'll clear this out and send us off. Hey, the last thing I'll say on Mittelstadt before you bounce is, that Peters Rivet podcast, that's a player's podcast. And I want to, I'm kind of wondering how he's going to process that. He's heard the noise, I'm sure. This isn't new, but let's pay attention. Just kind of see if there's a noticeable change in on and off the ice with Casey Mittelstadt. And you're down there. We'll be expecting you to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, that is one that cuts through the noise. I don't know if the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show has made its way into the locker room, but I feel pretty confident that the After the Whistle show has broken the blood-brain barrier there a little bit.
We'll find out. Yeah, let us know what you're seeing down there. That's the benefit of you being around, man. You see the things that myself and all of us in the chat often do not. All right, Matthew, get on your way. I'll close us out. Hey, thanks everyone for hopping in on this lovely Saturday afternoon here in Buffalo, New York. It's 46 degrees right now. I was going to go golfing this morning. I'm glad I didn't, because then we wouldn't have the opportunity to do this. Plus, I didn't feel like getting all muddy and stuff. And I'm going to go make a bloody
It got wet out there. It rained a little bit in Hamburg out by
it did.
Out by us, so.
Walking the dog sucked. I actually had a little hail this morning. But hey, thanks everyone as always for hopping in. We'll be back again soon. I have to travel on business this week, so we have to find a time, Matthew, to kind of make it right. We'll do another episode here in the next couple days, but multiple episodes a week coming your way from the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. For Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, for the production crew enjoying a very lovely day. I'm going to bring him a drink out in the production truck. I'm Kris Baker. We'll see you again very soon.